Hello there, welcome to my next lesson. It's going to be on Macbeth Act 3, Scene 1. That's going to be the main focus for your annotations today, but we're going to do quite a lot of filling in the gaps in between the last lesson that we did. So the learning question for this video is, can I understand and analyse the language, form and structure in all of these scenes, and be able to add in, where relevant, the social and historical context and any context relating to the genre of drama, specifically Shakespeare's drama and Shakespeare's Jacobean audience for Macbeth. So before we get going, just can you make sure that you have your copy of the play open and a pen or pencil ready to annotate with. If you don't have a copy of the play, you're going to find a link underneath to a document which contains Act 3, Scene 1, which is kind of nice and big with plenty of room to annotate round. So you may want to pause the video, look in the description underneath and print yourself a copy of the scene. Okay, you can have a look. Most of the lesson today is focused on this character you can see here from the Polanski version of Macbeth, and that is Banquo. And I think that this quotation, which Macbeth says, "Our fears in Banquo stick deep," that focuses entirely on what happens in Act 3, Scene 1. Everything that happens and everything that's planned in that act is because Macbeth is really, really afraid of Banquo. Okay, so let's have a little recap. Act 2, Scene 2. That's the scene that opens with the Lady Macbeth's soliloquy, "That which hath made them drunk hath made me bold." And in this scene, Macbeth returns after murdering King Duncan, holding the daggers. He's forgotten to leave them behind. When Lady Macbeth talks to him and says, "Take those daggers back," he cannot face up to what he's done. He can't face up to the murder that he's done. So Lady Macbeth herself takes the daggers back and she puts the blood on the face of the guards to frame them. This is probably the first time in the play that we're introduced to the motif of sleep, or rather Macbeth's inability to sleep properly. He thinks that he hears the people in the chambers that he's passed coming back from the murder talking about how Glamis hath murdered sleep, and Macbeth does murder sleep. You can see in the quotation underneath. Macbeth also says, "I could not say Amen." So he heard the men praying, try and get back to sleep, and he prayed with them, but he couldn't say Amen. Amen is the word that sends your prayer up to God, and he couldn't say it because he knows that having committed a mortal sin of murder, like, God has no truck with him anymore. He's beyond redemption. He can't be forgiven for committing a mortal sin. Heaven is closed to him now. In this scene, Lady Macbeth has some key quotations too. She tries to shame Macbeth, which she always enjoys doing. "My hands are of your colour." It's coated in blood. You can see in the picture there too. "But I shame to wear a heart so white." By calling his heart white, she's calling him a coward. And then she says, "A little water clears us of this deed." So if you wash your hands and get the blood off, it's as if the deed never happened. Obviously, that turns out to be highly ironic, as we know that later she just keeps trying to wash the blood off her hands as she sleepwalks shortly before her death. Okay, so in Act 2, Scene 3, it opens with a bawdy character, the porter, the guy who's in charge of the door to Macbeth's castle. It's the only moment of comedy that we have in the entire play. Macbeth's a really, really intense play. Even in some of Shakespeare's real set piece kind of tragedies like King Lear and Hamlet, there's a lot more humour than there is in Macbeth. The porter Is about the only one who provides us with any humour, and that humour, frankly, is quite dark as well. So he gives us some bawdy humour. He talks about the effects of alcohol. He says that alcohol provokes lechery. Lechery, Sarah, provokes and unprovokes, and lechery means when someone gets kind of chases after sex, basically. So he's saying alcohol provokes and unprovokes. And then basically the porter goes on and gives us far too much information and explains the effects of alcohol on a man's performance when he's feeling a little bit sexy. So that's the kind of the bawdy, the sexual and toilet humour that is included in the Drunken Porter's speech. However, the satire comes about when he talks about equivocation. He also talks about alcohol being a great equivocator as well. And you can have a look underneath, I put here, equivocation is the attempt to conceal the truth using ambiguous language. So, and the example they give here is a salesman is trying to sell something to an elderly couple, and he is trying to conceal the truth about the terms of the sale so that the elderly couple will buy, even though it's a really bad deal. And then I found a picture of the lovely Charlotte from Geordie Shore, and I've tried to do some equivocation here. Your lip fillers don't not look nice, so you can see by using really vague language and a double negative there, I've tried to cover up the idea that I think that her lips look absolutely ridiculous. So I'm trying to equivocate there. Now, it's actually an AO3, a social and historical context point, why the Drunken Porter was going on about equivocation, because King James I of England, although his mother was Catholic, Catholicism at this point, this kind of version of Christianity, was outlawed in England at the time. And Catholics were being held to trial. By the time King James I was trying the Catholics, they weren't being executed for being Catholics, but they'd have a lot of their property and their belongings taken from them. If they didn't step in line with the Protestant religion, they would lose their rights to own their own property. So if it did come to court, Catholics would deliberately, when they were given their evidence in court, use vague language, as it says in the box above, to avoid incriminating themselves or others without lying in the eyes of God. So, so they're kind of like twisting the language to suggest that they were following the Protestant faith, not the Catholic faith, but using that language in a sufficiently vague way that they wouldn't have their stuff confiscated from them, but they also wouldn't kind of betray God by not following what they believe to be the true religion. Okay, so you can see even the date there and the trial of Henry Garnet really lines up with the dates of Macbeth. So that was what was kind of in the news in Shakespeare's day, these Catholics equivocating when they had their day in court. Okay, so Act 2, Scene 4 is a really strange little scene, and we haven't really studied it. It's one that we've seen when we've watched the video versions of Macbeth. So just think a little bit more closely about what happens in Act 2, Scene 4, because it is significant. The character Ross is talking to an old man, and they are acting almost like a narrator to fill us in on what's been going on in the world whilst Macbeth's been busy killing King Duncan and being made king himself. And lots of unnatural events have been happening. So nature is acting in an unnatural way. And the Jacobeans believed that if something was wrong, like in issues of kingship, for example, then that would make the natural world go upside down as well. In this scene also the motif of darkness is developed, and you can see that in this quotation. Ross says, "By the clock 'tis day, and yet dark night strangles the travelling camp." So he's saying, you know, if you know what the time is, it is the daytime and it should be light, but it's dark all the time. Basically, it's daytime, but it's dark all the time. So that's really, really strange. Obviously, there's weird kind of weather conditions going on and so on. And also the personification of nighttime there, nighttime acting like a murderer, that really links in with the idea of murder happening at night in the darkness. And then the old man comes up with something even more disturbing in nature, which is happening. A falcon towering in her pride of place was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed. And a falcon is a bird of prey, like type of eagle, a predator right at the top of the bird kind of food chain, if you like. And whilst an owl is also a predator, and owls do kill small mammals such as mice, in the kind of the chain of birds, and an owl would kind of rank well below a falcon in its viciousness. And yet this owl has acted like the hawk and has attacked and killed a falcon. So it's kind of like things aren't happening in the right order. And actually, if you think about that, Duncan could be like this falcon towering in her pride of place. So Duncan as king with his entourage around him, being taken out by another predator who is Macbeth. Macbeth's like the mousing owl. But obviously it's kind of put in perspective, because Macbeth is kind of a lower down the food chain, or he was up until this point. And then the final one is the most disturbing one of all, and I've tried to find you an image to go with this one. Ross says Duncan's horses, and he goes on to explain more, and then the old man agrees with him. Yeah, Duncan's horses did eat each other. So there have been stories about horses and ponies turning against each other and getting vicious towards each other and eating each other in real life. If you go and do a Google search, you'll find evidence of that happening even nowadays, but it's a rare event. And horses aren't even carnivores, so it's really, really sinister. So so this weird discussion between them, and as I said, they're acting almost like a narrator to kind of link up some of the events that have happened in the meantime. It's like, because Macbeth has murdered a king, although these two may suspect it, but they don't know it for sure. Macbeth's got away with it. They're talking about the way that the natural order has been turned upside down here. Things in nature aren't what they should be. Anyway, after this interesting discussion, Macduff enters, and he tells the pair of them that Macbeth has gone to Scone to be invested. So at Scone, he's dressed in his robes, given the articles. Basically, he's gone to Scone to be made a king. And those of you who do French will know that vêtement is clothes. So you can see where that word invested comes from, put into the clothes. And obviously, even nowadays, a vest is something that we call it an undergarment in our country, in our language too. Macduff, however, is not going to go to Scone. He is not showing support for Macbeth on his big day. He says Alta Fife. So Macduff's other name is the Thane of Fife. That's the part of Scotland that he's in charge of. And throughout this section of the scene that Macduff's in, Macduff is extremely sarcastic. He puns on the word well in this scene. He makes it very, very clear that he believes Macbeth is responsible for the death of Duncan. He never actually says it, though. He just uses his sarcasm to convey that. However, Macbeth will certainly note his absence. Macbeth at the moment is quite obsessed with Banquo, but when he deals with Banquo, he's going to carry on thinking about Macduff, and the Macduff is going to be the next threat. Okay, so that's like our first little bit of filling in and revising and recapping those bits we've either studied with Lady Macbeth or the bits that we've seen on the video before. Before we go on to the annotation of Act 3, Scene 1, I'd really like you to watch the Sir Ian McKellan version of this scene. It's just under 10 minutes long. Obviously, I've put the web address here, but much easier is just to pause this video and minimize it and find the link in the description underneath, then press back and come back to me. This one, if you remember this guy here who is playing Banquo, there's another great interview with him, this kind of little dramatization where he embeds and explains some of the quotations. On the same scene, you just page down and there's another interview with Macbeth himself where he talks about the murderers and everything as well. Okay, so it's really, really well worth watching that. So what you could do is take a little break, watch these two, which will take you about 20 minutes, and then come back ready to do some annotation. Okay, so Act 3, Scene 1 then, and Banquo is at the palace, as it says in the stage directions here. And normally it's Macbeth that we're used to doing his soliloquies, but this time Banquo has a soliloquy, a very short soliloquy of his own. Thou hast it now, King Cawdor Glamis, all as the weird women promised, and I fear thou playest most foully for it. Yet it was said, it should not stand in thy posterity, but that myself should be the root and father of many kings. If there come truth from them, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine. Why, by the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up in hope? But hush, no more. So the first thing that I noticed, remember what I said, in a soliloquy, the characters tell the truth. And we see what's really in their heart. And Banquo, throughout this, refers to Macbeth as thou, which is, remember, the disrespectful version of you. So when Macbeth is actually talking, when Banquo is actually talking to Macbeth, it's always you, your highness. But when he's thinking about Macbeth and soliloquizing, it is the disrespectful version, thou, thy, thee. And that shows that Banquo in his heart, either he still sees Macbeth as an equal, as a soldiers in arms, as a friend, or Banquo in his heart of hearts has not got any respect for Macbeth. He knows that Macbeth's killed King Duncan and the respect has been stripped away. So if you're going to analyse his use of that pronoun, the disrespectful, the casual use of the pronoun there, you'd want to look at both of those interpretations. Okay, so it doesn't mean that one's more right than the other, they both could be. So remember what I said, either he's thinking about their old friendship and being equals, being soldiers in arms together, so maybe no disrespect in that situation, or it could be that because he knows that Macbeth played most foully for it, he's lost all respect for Macbeth in his true heart, even though he's putting on a front and showing respect to him to his face. Something else, Banquo is clearly thinking about the weird women, the witches, immediately, King Cawdor Glamis. He uses a list of 3. It's almost like a reverse order of what the witches said earlier. And then the all can be taken 2 ways as well. King Cawdor Glamis, all. So everything that they promised. Or it could be all as the weird women promised. So again, it has the same kind of meaning, but just different inflection depending on how you're saying it. Then this is like quite a famous quotation, isn't it? Thou placed most foully for it. So a superlative adverb there with that most. But this also reminds me of the witches, again, when we first met them. Fair is foul and foul is fair, they said. And here Macbeth has played most foully for it, for the kingship, for becoming king. And that really reminded me of the witches, fair is foul and foul is fair. But also remember Macbeth said, so a fair and fouler day I have not seen, when he first comes into the play, echoing again those words, the witches. Then, although Banquo is worrying about Macbeth, clearly he has some faith, he has some belief in what those witches have prophesied, because he remembers his own prophecy, and he starts to hope that these prophecies may come true. So he remembers, myself should be the root and father of many kings. He hopes, may they, the witches, may they not be my oracle as well. So the oracle is someone who tells your fortune, and an oracle is normally correct as well. And actually thinking that he is going to be the father to kings, that may shape his future action when it comes to Fleance as well. So when they're ambushed, riding out in the dark a little bit later on, perhaps that's why he makes sure that Fleance gets to safety and almost sacrifices himself, because he's thinking of this prophecy just here. So a little weird word here, this word senet, and senet is another word for a cornet, a small trumpet. So it's kind of quite a weak sounding trumpet. And in comes Lady Macbeth. And Macbeth, he's the king now, and she's dressed as a queen, so they've got all the robes on and what have you. And like the guy said in the video, it's quite a massive like entourage that comes in. You can imagine that if you're Banquo, that's like quite threatening in a way, all of these people coming in, Macbeth's massive entourage. And straight away Macbeth flatters Banquo. He calls him, here's our chief guest. And a little bit later on in Act 3, Scene 2, he confided Lady Macbeth that he hates having to flatter and kind of kiss up to Banquo. He really hates doing that. And that's probably another reason why he desperately wants Banquo dead. Banquo says to Macbeth says to Banquo, come to our solemn supper. And what he means by solemn is it's a formal dinner. So it's like a formal state dinner, a fancy sit-down job with like all your cutlery and everything. So here we see a real contrast in the way that Banquo addresses Macbeth. So back in the Soliloquy, it was all thee, thy, and thou. And here it's the respectful pronoun use, respectful, and very respectful address term, your highness. Macbeth is now the king, and he is on high, your highness, he's called now. In this little section, Banquo says, you don't have to request my presence at your dinner party. You can command me now. You're the king. I'm not sure that Banquo needs to say this, but I guess he wants to make the point really, really clear to Macbeth. Yep, I know where I stand in the hierarchy, and I know that I'm below you. So don't request. You might as well just command, because I have to do what you say. I would imagine if I was Banquo, this would be starting to ring some alarm bells for me when Macbeth asks, ride you this afternoon? So Macbeth's return in that respect with the formal pronoun you. But frighteningly, Macbeth needs this information so that he can set up that ambush. He's trying to get further information out of Banquo. Where are you going riding, to try and work that out. And if you notice in this section, Macbeth switches to something called the royal we. We should else desired your good advice. And you even hear like our Queen Elizabeth using the royal we. And it's because as a member of royalty, you represent your whole country. So whatever you want doing, you're doing it for the sake of your country. And that's why we get this royal we. And Macbeth takes this on immediately. We should have else desired your good advice, which still hath been both grave and prosperous. So he's still flattering Banquo here. He's saying, tomorrow I will take your good advice, because you're a very serious man, a grave man, and very prosperous. You do very well, so you're a good person for me to turn to for advice. and he says, "We'll take tomorrow." And in different versions of Macbeth, sometimes it says, "We'll talk tomorrow," sometimes, "We'll take tomorrow." But anyway, basically that's what Macbeth is suggesting. We'll talk tomorrow, and this could be Macbeth trying to be a little bit cunning, isn't he? It's like he's trying to cover up the fact that he's actually planning to murder Banquo, and the assassins, the murderers, are just waiting outside at the moment. Um, and again, another question, is it far you ride? So he's really, really probing, trying to work out how far Banquo's going, what direction he's going in, so that he can tell the murderers where they can set up their ambush. Really probing away. So Banquo answers, well, he's equivocating actually, as we've been looking at that word, as far, my lord, as will fill up the time twixt this and supper. So he's not saying how far, he's just saying, I'm going to be riding out and then riding back, and I'll be back in time for tea, kind of thing. What he does say, however, is, I must become a borrower of the night for a dark hour or twain. So twain means two. So he said, when I ride out the last 2 hours, when I come back, then it's going to be dark by then. So that's how long I'm going to be out. So this motif of darkness is emphasized, or it recurs again. When Banquo is killed, when he's on his way back to the palace, it's going to be dark. And then when we look at his murder a little bit further on, we'll see that indeed it is in darkness. Banquo is carrying a torch, and that torch is stolen and extinguished by one of the murders before his murder actually happens. So, as I've said, there's lots of foreshadowing here. So that's a structural technique whereby the writer drops in loads of clues as to what's going to happen a little bit later. So the flattery continues. My lord it is now. You only have to say my highness once. Then after that you can use normal address terms, but it's still very flattering. My lord, I will not. And then Macbeth seems to try to make some small talk with Banquo. He says, we hear our bloody cousins are bestowed in England and in Ireland. So here he's talking about Malcolm and Donalbain. And remember, if Macbeth was cousin to King Duncan, as he was, then Malcolm and Donalbain would also be his cousins. And I never understand the cousin things with their second cousins or once removed or whatever, but they're still related by blood. When he says bloody cousins, he doesn't mean blood related, though. He means my murderous cousins who killed King Duncan. So Macbeth is being quite brazen here. He says that Malcolm and Donalbain are not confessing their cruel parricide. Parricide means the killing of your father. And I think by Macbeth choosing that word, he's trying to make this crime sound even worse. And then he suggests that Malcolm and Donalbain are trying to spread lies, strange invention, spread lies about Duncan's death rather than admit that they did it. Of course, like we, the reader, and Shakespeare's audience all know that it was Macbeth. Like I said, Macbeth is being kind of quite brazen here. Now, it's interesting that when Macbeth says goodbye to Banquo, the first time he says goodbye, he kind of slips up a little bit because he says adieu. And adieu means to God. And it's a goodbye, which is in early modern English used as a very, very final farewell. So it's the kind of thing that you might say to someone if you know you're not going to see them again, maybe for like several months or a year, or maybe even something that you might say to someone like on their deathbed, this kind of thing. And he corrects himself, you see, straight away. Hie you to horse, adieu. And straight away he corrects himself, till you return at night. So again, like all the bells must be absolutely ringing in Banquo's ears, all the warning bells, he knows that something is up and he's going to need to be careful. And perhaps that's why he does carry a torch later when he goes riding and it becomes dark. And again, Macbeth tries to correct himself here. I wish your horses swift and sure of foot, and so I do commend you to their backs. And instead of saying adieu here, he says farewell. So he kind of corrects his earlier mistake. But you can see why he wants to say this final farewell almost to Banquo, because as soon as Banquo leaves, he calls his attendant over, his servant, and says, attend those men our pleasure. So the two murderers are lurking around without the palace gate, so they're just outside the palace, and Macbeth now wants to bring them in and talk to them. So before the servants come in, Macbeth has another soliloquy, so another Macbeth soliloquy, and this is how it goes. To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. So he starts off by saying there's absolutely no point whatsoever in being king unless I can enjoy it free of fear, unless I'm safely king and no one's going to try to take that away from me. What's he worried about? Banquo. Our fears in Banquo stick deep. So that's a really, really good quotation to learn. And if you remember the whole video, I started off with that quotation. That's what this is all about. It's all about Macbeth's fear of Banquo. Why is he afraid of Banquo? Well, he's afraid of Banquo because Banquo is the only one, apart from his wife, who knows about the witches, the weird sisters. And Banquo is the one who suspects that Macbeth didn't come naturally by the kingship. He's actually taken matters into his own hands. However, he's afraid of Banquo for other reasons as well. He talks about his royalty of nature. I put here in the annotations, Banquo has a royal soul. But I think what he means by that is that the way that he carries himself, he has this kind of regality about him, that people take notice of what he says, and maybe that's something that Macbeth doesn't see in himself. However, what it could also mean is if Banquo has this kind of royal soul, Macbeth is thinking about the witches and their prophecy that Banquo's descendants, Banquo's sons, are going to be kings as well. He also worries about Banquo because he has that dauntless temper of his mind. He hath a wisdom that doth guide his valour to act in safety. So again, it seems to me that maybe Macbeth's also a little jealous of Banquo. He has a dauntless temper of his mind. So Banquo has much better control of his mental faculties than Macbeth does. So maybe what he means by that is that Banquo is a much more even-tempered man. He manages to take things in his stride. And we've seen already from Macbeth that he doesn't take things in his stride, that he really suffers from problems with his mental health. He worries so much about everything. He never comes to a straight decision, but he's always troubled by troublesome thoughts, always worrying about things in his head. He also states that Banquo has this wisdom. He has a wisdom. So although, like Macbeth himself, he has valour, bravery, remember, valour means very old-fashioned word for bravery. Maybe Banquo has a wisdom that goes with that valour. So whereas someone like Macbeth is brave, but he's quite reckless, so he doesn't always take care of his own safety, Banquo's bravery is backed up by common sense, by wisdom, and that manages to keep him safe. Then if you have a look, I've highlighted in pink here, there is none but he whose being I do fear. So what Macbeth is saying here is there's nobody that I fear apart from Banquo. And I mentioned earlier, of course, Macduff, as soon as Banquo's dead, Macbeth's fear turns to Macduff instead. Macduff, who didn't go to Scone, Macduff, who doesn't come to his formal banquet. So there's a really, really strong irony there, isn't there? Because he says, I only fear Banquo, but it's kind of like when he kills Banquo, he's like, oh, no, I'm afraid of Macduff instead. So, so yeah, a real kind of sense of irony there, especially when we know what's going to happen later. Just really, really quickly, under him, my genius is rebuked, as it is said Mark Antony's was by Caesar. And this is a little historical bit. So it's not the original Caesar, Julius Caesar. It's actually the second Caesar, the son of Julius Caesar here. And Mark Antony and Caesar, plus another guy called Pompey, tried to rule the Roman Empire, like a three-way kind of split. And Mark Antony was meant to be a really clever man, a really good warrior, but the younger Caesar was a real, really, really clever, really tactical, like quite emotionally cold. And Shakespeare had read about this, and Shakespeare's audience would have known this from the histories which were written by a historian called Plutarch. And he's kind of comparing himself to Mark Antony Macbeth is here. So he's almost suggesting that Banquo is more kind of level-headed, more emotionally stable, more kind of clever and more cunning. And by using these skills of statesmanship, he managed to kind of squash down and finally defeat Mark Antony, the Roman captain. So then he reflects back onto Banquo again, and Banquo says he chid the sisters, so that's the witches again he's talking about, when they first put the name of king upon me and bade them speak to him. So he's kind of like, well, I tried to get the witches to tell me things and they didn't answer my questions, and yet when Banquo questioned them, what's in the seeds time for me, he got answers out of them. And this is something that Macbeth is really, really hung up on. Remember, Macbeth now has no children. And this really shows his jealousy in Banquo. Prophet like the witches hailed him father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren sceptre in my grip. So the sceptre is something that you would hold as king. So you'd hold this kind of sceptre, probably made of gold, and then you'd have the orb as well, which you'd hold. And he's being invested at Scone, and he would have had that in his hand. You know, he's still dressed as king now, even when he's entered in his entourage. But he's saying that the sceptre is barren, and barren is another word for like incapable of having children. And he talks about fruitless. So a tree which is fruitless, it can't germinate its seeds properly. So these two words both show that he and his wife can't bear children. And then he says, thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. He says, what's the point? What is the point of being king if he has no son to pass the kingship onto? And again, he's like, you really get a sense of his jealousy that Banquo's got his fiancée. And obviously when he talks to the murderers, that's where he's so keen for fiancée to be taken out of the picture as well. And Macbeth goes on to think, what was the point of anything that I've done? He says, if this be so, for Banquo's issue, Banquo's sons and his ancestors, not his ancestors, sorry, the children that he's going to have, King James's ancestors, have I filed or defiled my mind. For them, the gracious Duncan, have I murdered, put rancours in the vessel of my peace. So both of these green quotations here, I filed my mind, defiled my mind. I've put rancours in the vessel of my peace. Both of those mean he's destroyed his own mental well-being. And what's he destroyed his mental well-being for? Just to put the crown, the future crown, onto Banquo's son's heads, and then the sons of Banquo's sons, and so on and so on and so on. So he has destroyed his mental well-being. I've defiled my mind, and I put rancors in the vessel of my peace. But worse than that, he has only for them mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man. And mine eternal jewel is his soul. And if you notice, just up here, he's used this word that he rarely uses. Have I murdered? I murdered Duncan. He's actually said it. He's not personifying murder. He's saying, I have murdered Duncan. What have I done it for? I've done it for Banquo's kids. I have condemned my mortal soul to hell. Not for my own kids, but for Banquo's kids. And that's something that he's really clearly regretting here. What I noticed in this soliloquy is his troubled mind, really. He keeps making really similar points. He keeps repeating them, but just wording them in different ways. So you can really see Macbeth's internal struggle in this soliloquy here. Down the bottom is a jousting metaphor. So just in case you don't know what jousting is, there's a picture here. So you can see two knights dressed up for the tournament, the jousting tournament. And these, hopefully you can tell, are horses. And when you're jousting, you have this huge spear, which is called a lance, and you aim to take your opponent off his horse by a legal hit. And I think a hit to the head is kind of the highest score. So even if you don't get him off his horse, you get more points for hitting him on his head. And what the point of this metaphor is, this jousting metaphor, is Macbeth says this: come fate into the list and champion me to the utterance. So what he's saying is, fate, I want you to come into the jousting arena and I want you to champion me. And it's really ambiguous here. It's unclear whether Macbeth is inviting fate to have Macbeth as his champion, in which case fate would be on Macbeth's side if fate wanted Macbeth to be the champion, or whether he's challenging fate to challenge Macbeth. Okay, let's have a duel. So it's this kind of idea. Fate says Macbeth isn't going to have children. Fate says Macbeth is having no more children and Banquo's children are going to become the king. So he's like, all right, come on then, fate. Come into the jousting arena, bring it on, and we're going to see who wins this contest. I think, to me, that makes more sense than saying I want to be fate's champion. It's more kind of challenging fate, because the fate's laid out. You're not going to have kids, and your kids aren't going to be kings. It's Banquos who are going to be kings. That's what fate has laid down for you. Okay, so at the end of that scene, at the end of that soliloquy, beg your pardon, Macbeth invites in the two murderers. The two murderers have appeared, and these two questions here: was it not yesterday we spoke together? Have you considered of my speeches? By using these two questions, it establishes to the audience that the murderers have already met with Macbeth. And Macbeth says this, he's really cunning in this section. He says, know that it was he in the times past which held you so under fortune, which you thought had been our innocent self. So what Macbeth is saying is, these two, murderer one and murderer two, they have been suffering really bad luck. They've been absolutely under the cosh in the times past, in the recent past. And Macbeth says, remember last time we met, you thought it was me who was giving you a really hard time and making your lives hell. Well, hopefully, when I met you, you now realise it wasn't me at all. It was Banquo who was giving you a hard time all this time. So Macbeth calls himself our innocent self. And he said, I made good to you in our last conference, passed in probation with you, how you were born in Hannah across the instruments, who wrought with them, and all things else that might to half a soul and a nation crazed say, thus did Banquo. And the murderer agrees, yes, you did make that known to us. But it seems clearly that Macbeth has provided the murderers with fake evidence, and he's actually kind of stitched up Banquo here. It's not Banquo who's been making their lives a misery. It is indeed, as they believed, Macbeth himself. So Macbeth is being really cunning, really tricky, really manipulative in this section. Macbeth goes on to say, I did so, and went further, which is now the point of second meeting. Do you find your patience so predominant in your nature that you can let this go? You can see in this little section, he's saying, are you going to take that? Are you going to stand there and take that? Now that you know that it was Banquo, are you going to accept the way that he's been treating you? So, a rhetorical question there as Macbeth constructed argument to persuade the murderers to kill Banquo. He goes on to say, you so gospelled to pray for this good man and for his issue, whose heavy hand hath bowed you to the grave and beggared yours forever. So it's saying Banquo has been so cruel to you that he's basically driving you into an early grave. He says, he's almost suggesting, are you so gospelled? Have you been so brainwashed that you are saying prayers for Banquo and his issue, Fleance, you're actually saying prayers for these two who have made your lives a living hell and sending you into an early grave. So again, this is really, really similar to the way that Lady Macbeth persuaded Macbeth to do that original murder of Duncan, isn't it? It's kind of almost questioning their manhood, saying, are you going to let that go? Are you going to take that? Really? Now that you know it was Banquo who did it. So the first murderer answers, we are men, my liege. So he's kind of saying, yeah, well, it's in men's nature to do that, like to reflect upon what you've said, maybe take some revenge. And Macbeth kind of goes into this really, really strange list here. He says, yeah, I suppose, like in the catalogue of men, you are men. And he talks about, he gives this massive list of dogs, doesn't he? It's hounds, greyhounds, mongrels, spaniels, curs, choughs, water rugs, demi-wolves. They're all called dogs, or clapped by the name of gods. And he says, and all the dogs have different characteristics. So you might have fast dogs, slow dogs, subtle dogs. I don't know if that means kind of cunning dogs. So, dogs who seem to be able to get away with murder. A housekeeper, that would be like a guard dog. A hunter, so that would be one that picks up the scent if you were hunting for deer or for fox or whatever. He says every dog, according to the gift which bounteous nature hath him enclosed, whereby he doth receive particular addition from the bill that writes them all alike. And so have men. So he's basically saying men are like dogs. They all have their own different skills and characteristics. Now he says, if you have a station in the file, not in the worst rank of manhood, say it, and I'll put the business in your bosoms, whose execution takes your enemy off, grapples you to the heart and the love of us. So he's saying, well, yeah, actually, if you are a man and you're not in the worst rank of manhood, you're not like a really, really rubbish man, you tell me that and you can do this murder for me, because if you do, if you follow my cunning plan, and if it all goes well, together we'll get rid of Banquo. And if you can get rid of Banquo, so Banquo is your enemy, and take your enemy off, get rid of Banquo, kill him. If you can manage to do that, I'm going to give you lots of love and respect. Now, bear in mind that Macbeth is the king now, so actually having lots of love and respect from the king could put you in a really valuable position. So again, Macbeth is being really, really cunning, really manipulative, and he's trying to promise things to these murderers, which will come about if they follow his cunning plan. Okay, so he talks more about Banquo. I might suggest that he's possibly giving away a little bit too much about what's on his mind now. He says that Banquo, who wear our health, but sickly in his life. So what he means there is, while he's still alive, Banquo is actually making me ill. He's making me sickly while he's alive, which in his death were perfect. When he's dead, I will be perfect. Thank you very much. The second murderer says, I'm on my liege, whom the vile blows and buffets of the world have so incensed. I'm reckless what I do to spite the world. So basically what this means in English is the world has treated me so badly that I'll do anything. I don't care anymore. And if we have a closer look at some of those words, what they mean, the vile blows means like punches of the world. So it's almost as if he's been beaten up by the world. And buffets is when you get kind of blown and knocked about from one place to another. So sometimes when it's really, really windy, you can talk about the wind buffeting you about. It's like when you get thrown from one side to the other. And he says, I'm reckless. I don't care anymore. I'm reckless what I do to spite the world. So almost like try and take revenge. It's like the world has treated him so badly. I don't care what I do. I just kind of want to get my own back. And then the first murderer also agrees, and another, so weary with disasters. He said, I'm so worn out with everything going wrong in my life. He says, I've been tugged with fortune. So it's this idea that fortune's been kind of lady luck again, this idea of luck being personified. And tugged can be mauled. It's like he's been chewed up and spat out by fortune, by lady luck. And is almost going back to that whole dog thing that Macbeth was talking about before. He's been mauled by fortune. That I would set my life on any chance to mend it or be rid on it. So he's saying, like, yeah, I'll take my chances. I'm either going to win and then I'll be your best mate, or I'm going to die. Whichever outcome happens, got to be better than what is going on in my life at the moment. So they both seem totally persuaded by Macbeth's argument, and they're totally up for killing Banquo, it would seem. Macbeth says, both of you know Banquo was your enemy. And here Macbeth is still being really persuasive, and here he's using really clear and blunt language. So this is something that Donald Trump is really good at. One of the few things in argumentative speaking, perhaps, that Donald Trump is really good at, speaking really clearly and bluntly and just saying something. No, Banquo was your enemy. Here, Macbeth says, clear and blunt, you can understand the argument. And then he goes on to say, so is he mine. And this idea, yeah, Banquo was your enemy, he's also my enemy. And by saying that, by having a common enemy in an argument, there's helping to bond them together. And Macbeth was doing that before. He was kind of saying, we can be great mates and I will love you and hold you in self-esteem forever. Now he's saying, not only that, but we also share an enemy, and you can help me out with that. We can get rid of that enemy. And Macbeth repeats kind of what he said up here, really similar. He said, every minute of his being thrusts against my nearest of life. So my nearest of life is a euphemism for heart, his heart. So what he's suggesting here is Banquo being alive makes Macbeth's heart pound. Maybe that could be in illness and sickness, or it could be in anger, it could be in stress, anything that kind of makes your heart pound. We find out later in the ghost scene that Macbeth keeps having these fits, doesn't he? And perhaps that it's not such a fit, maybe it's more like a panic attack, and when he thinks about Banquo, this kind of fit comes over him, where it's like a panic attack, that kind of thing. Though I could with barefaced power sweep him from my sight and bid my will avouch it, yet I must not. So we can see just in the green here, barefaced power. He's the king now. I could easily kill Banquo. I could easily order his death because I'm so powerful now. I'm the king. But perhaps he's also giving a little warning to the murderers that, yeah, I can kill Banquo, but I'm thinking twice about it. I have to be careful about it. Do you think that I need to be careful about killing you too? It's kind of almost like a hidden warning there, is not very well hidden. But he's not going to just order his execution, he says, whose loves, for certain friends that are both his and mine, whose loves I may not drop, but wail his fall, who I myself struck down. And thence it is that I to your assistance do make love, masking the business from the common eye for sundry weighty reasons. What he's saying here is, I can't just kill him myself. I can't just order his execution because we have mutual friends and it would really, really upset them. I need these friends. They're really important to me. But these friends would wail, and wail means loud crying. They would wail his fall. They would be extremely upset by Banquo's death. So if I just killed Banquo myself or ordered his execution with no good reason, I'm going to lose these friends who are going to be really, really important to me as king. So he flatters them, your assistants to make love. So he's saying, that's why I'm here. I really, really need your help. I can't do this without you because we need to do it like this. So he's using that argumentative technique of flattery. And of course, he flattered them previously, didn't he, when he said, I'll be your best friend. I'll love you forever if you do this. Okay, so I can't do it without you. That's what he's suggesting. So the second murderer says, we shall, my lord, perform what you command us. The first murderer tries to also make a statement, though our lives, but Macbeth just cuts him off. He cuts the first murderer off just when he's trying to make this speech, or maybe change his mind or whatever. Your spirit shines through you. So you say, oh, look, well done, you two. Yeah, you look as if you're really up for it. And yeah, you're taking the right attitude here. And this is what's going to happen now. Within this hour at most, I will advise you where to plant yourselves. So he's saying here, I'll tell you where to go, where to hide, what time, acquaint you with the perfect spy of the time, tell you what time to be there. In the green it says, for it must be done tonight, and something from the palace. So he's saying the murder has got to be done tonight, and it's got to be done away from the palace. Now, I've been talking to you a lot today and haven't asked many questions, but why would it need to be done away from the palace? Have a think about that question. I will come back to it in a moment. So not only must it be done away from the palace, I require a clearness. Leave no rubs nor botches in the work. It's got to be done perfectly. There can be no mistakes, no rubs nor botches in the work. So no little mistakes. Don't mess it up. And then he adds on, Fleance, his son that keeps in company, whose absence is no less material to me. So he's saying Fleance's death is just as important as Banquo's death. Make sure you kill the boy as well. Okay, his absence is no less material to me than is his father's. Must embrace the fate of that dark hour. And here comes that motif again. So it's going to happen when it's dark, because everything violent happens in darkness in this play. He says, I'll come to you anon. Anon means shortly, soon. It doesn't mean anonymously, it means soon. I'll come to you soon. And both murderers reply, we are resolved, my lord. So they're both determined that they're going to do this murder for him. Macbeth says, I'll call upon you straight, abide within, wait. I'm going to give you some more instructions soon. And off, toddle on off the murderers. And Macbeth says to himself, it's concluded. So he's saying the plan is made. And this is weird. He kind of talks to Banquo, doesn't he? He uses direct address to Banquo. Banquo, thy soul's flight, if I find heaven, must find it out tonight. You notice that when he's just talking to himself, he calls Banquo thy as well. There's no respect between these two ex-colleagues and friends anymore. And he says to Banquo, if you're going to heaven, matey, you're going to find out tonight. So will his Christian soul make it to heaven? Well, we've got some more foreshadowing going on here, because we know that Banquo's soul is definitely not going to go straight to heaven. It's going to go to purgatory first in the form of a ghost who's looking for some revenge on Macbeth. So no, it's almost like Macbeth has called it, isn't it? He's saying, are you off to heaven? No, he's not, because he's got unfinished business. And if you have unfinished business, then you don't go straight to heaven. He's going to come back as a ghost. And of course, we're going to finish on our lovely rhyming couplet. Thy soul's flight, if it finds heaven, must find it out tonight. So it's very final, because it's almost not just marking out the end of the scene, but marking out the end of Banquo's life there as well. So why would this murder need to happen away from the palace? That's because Macbeth does not want to be implicated. No, no, no. He is setting himself up with an alibi, isn't he? He needs to be miles away from the palace, so he's not implicated at all. Okay, so we're going to quickly recap the next two scenes then. So the scene that follows this, we studied really, really closely. We were looking at Lady Macbeth and the way that she, her relationship to Macbeth was changing, the way that she had to ask a servant if she can see Macbeth, and then having to be much more careful with her husband when she actually gets in to see him. When she gets in, they talk about Macbeth's fears about Banquo. Macbeth talks quite a lot about his inability to sleep and about his mental struggles. And then they talk about the formal banquet that evening. Here are some of the key quotations from this scene. So Lady Macbeth tries to comfort Macbeth by saying what's done is done. She's talking about the murder of King Duncan there, and she's saying we can't unmurder him, so you need to move on now, make the best of what you've got. And then she tells him, in this common theme of appearances being deceptive, sleek all your rugged looks. So try not to look so sleep deprived, have a good shave, make yourself look smart, be bright and jovial among your guests tonight. So don't look tired, don't look haggard, don't look unshaven, smarten yourself up and present yourself looking bright and fresh, as if you're really loving being king. Some key quotations from Macbeth in this scene. We have scorched the snake, not killed it. So there he's talking about, by killing Duncan, they've only managed to kind of just delay the snake, just slow it down for a bit. They haven't managed to kill the snake yet. So he's saying to kill the snake, he's suggesting it's Banquo, he's hinting at that. He doesn't actually tell Lady Macbeth that. And then again, this appearance as being deceptive theme comes up, make our faces visards to our hearts, disguising what they are. And then finally, and I've got a lovely picture of a scorpion just above my head here. Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. And it's that brilliant quotation that shows his entirely troubled mind, like the pain in his head, from all his troubling thoughts, probably from real headaches that he's having as well, the poison that's being injected to his mind, which could be linked to the witches as well. And then in Act 3, Scene 3, this is the one where Banquo is murdered. And this is a really nice cartoon that someone's done of it here. So you can see Banquo and Fleance, and you can see that Banquo is holding this torch. So Banquo is associated with the light. It's casting this light around them, whilst the murderers are lurking in that ambush behind the trees. And murderer one, I don't know which one's meant to be murderer one, first murderer, will extinguish this flame before the murder's committed, following that motif of death happening during darkness. And it's absolutely fitting that when the light goes out, Banquo goes out too, because he was kind of like this common sense, like beacon of hope that right would out in the end. However, the fact that the light is extinguished means that Fleance has the opportunity to escape. So the fates have beaten Macbeth here. So we just have a look at the notes and the quotes. Banquo is murdered in Act 3, Scene 3. A third murderer is present, and that reveals Macbeth's lack of trust in anybody, including these two murderers. Banquo is associated with the light, and the stage direction is enter Banquo and Fleance with a torch. And then, as I said, the other stage direction is first murderer strikes out the light. The motif of darkness developed here. The light has to be extinguished, as all evil deeds in the play happen in darkness, but this does allow Fleance to escape, and the quotation for that is "Flee, good Fleance." Right, let's have a think about your task next. So you'll find this task, a link to this task in the description underneath. So how does Shakespeare present Macbeth as a cunning villain in this section? How does Shakespeare present Macbeth as a cunning villain in the whole play? And in that part of the question, you might want to think about actually how he's not a cunning villain at the beginning of the play, but it becomes more and more cunning as the play progresses and as he kind of takes over that role from Lady Macbeth. So I'm not really going to give you any more help on it. You can replay the video and listen to what I said about this section and maybe make some more notes now that you know that that's what you're going to be looking at. So your challenge task is to take 50 minutes to an hour, which is approximately how long you'd have in the exam to do it, and have a go at writing the whole essay. What I both do and don't like about this extract is there's not loads in here about him being a cunning villain. There's probably only maybe 3 things you could talk about. I like that because it cuts down the choice and it means you can really focus on what is there. I don't like it because you don't have so much choice as to what you can write about. I think the second part is easier, especially if you disagree with it a little bit and trace how he becomes more cunning and more villainous as the play goes on. If you don't think you can manage writing the whole essay, have a go at the easier option. So what I'd like you to do for the easier option is just to choose one little section or one quotation from this extract and write a really detailed PEA paragraph on it. Lots of zooming in on the language as well as saying what it actually means. Then saying if you can link in any social historical context or any stagecraft into that. And then think about the whole play and think about another section where Macbeth is, or maybe even isn't, a cunning villain, and have a go at writing a paragraph about that. And I reckon for this one, you should spend about 10 to 15 minutes on each of the 2 paragraphs. So this task should take you about 20 to 30 minutes altogether. Okay, so next time we're going to be having a closer look at Act 3, Scene 4, the Banquets and Banquo's ghost. So again, we have had a look at that in class, but now what we're going to do next time is some zooming in on the language. So I will see you next time. Bye bye.